Thanks, everyone. I think Ebenezer and I did very well to set up in 5 minutes, didn't we, Ebenezer? Hello, everyone. My name is Max McGillivray from Beanstalk.Global. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you all today for this very, what should we call it, Simon? A very illuminating broadcast about Fairmiles. I'm going to let Simon introduce it properly, but just for those who are joining us, we've got 3 levels of engagement that are happening today. We've got some esteemed delegates in the room with us. We've got a number of delegates dialed in on Zoom, and we're also live on social media. And when we finish this broadcast, this will all go out into a record on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and also there'll be a podcast of this also that if you've got colleagues or other contacts that you want to hear this broadcast, you can then forward that on to them as well as the broadcast. Simon, shall we start with you? Could you introduce us and the broadcast and why we're all here today, please?
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Max. And well, thank you very much to everyone who's joined us here today, both in person and online. It's great to see so many people, wishing to engage in this debate. I should add as well, we're going to have the discussion and the Q&A. That won't be broadcast and recorded, so that will be recorded. So that'll give us the opportunity to have an open discussion after the presentations at the beginning. But as Max says, I'm Simon. I'm head of sustainability at a company called Blue Skies, and we make fresh prepared fruit which is manufactured at source. So we've got factories in Ghana, Benin, South Africa, Egypt, Brazil, and our value-added model allows us to provide opportunities for employment, technology transfer, skills development, and has a significant impact on our local communities. But with a highly perishable product, the only way for us to get it to our key markets is by air. And that brings us to why we're here today. So the term Fairmiles was actually coined back in 2009, and it appeared in a report published by Oxfam and IIED at the time about the impact of air-freighted fresh produce from developing countries. It was written in response to proposals at the time by the Soil Association to ban air-freighted organics. And in fact, one of the authors of the report, and certainly a number of people involved in that report, actually here with us today, and we'll be hearing from them later. And in the end, I should add that after extensive research and a lot of publicity, the Soil Association actually chose not to go ahead and ban air-freighted organics. But now, some 15 years later, and we breathed new life into Fairmiles. And you might ask, well, why? Why is Fairmiles back? Well, as a business, as businesses quite rightly want to join the race to meet net zero emissions targets, we're finding that air freight is once again under the spotlight. And I should also add as well, it's quite right that we should be aiming for those net zero targets. We're not here to debate that. But what we are here to debate is whether it's right and whether it's fair that air freight is once again under the spotlight. It could, it's seen as perhaps to be at odds with our plans and strategies to decarbonise. And in some cases, we're finding it's being questioned, and in other cases, it's being banned. But is that right, and is that fair? So if we just go on to the first slide.
Yeah. Just bear with me as we go through the niceties of IT. We've all been here before.
So what Max finds the slides. So we're here today to try and answer the question, which will hopefully appear on the screen in a moment. On to the next one. Yeah. How can we take a fair approach to net zero without stopping vital market access for developing world producers? Go to the next slide. So through our growing consortium, Fairmiles represents a wide variety of interests from fresh produce businesses, development organisations, and universities, and we thank all of our consortium members for their participation and their interest and engagement so far. This is an issue or a question which has clearly struck a nerve, and it's not something we can just sweep under the carpet or hide away from. We have to start talking about this openly and together working out what we're going to do. Go to the next slide. So we've got a great agenda here for you today. For the first part of the meeting, we're going to be hearing about some recent findings on the impact of air freighted fresh produce from developing countries. We're also going to be hearing reflections from the industry and perspectives on the ground as we consider climate justice considerations for net zero strategies. And then before we go into the discussion, we're going to hear some thoughts and ideas on what kind of next steps we might decide to take. And from there, we're going to open the floor for discussion. And we'd really like to hear your views, ideas, thoughts on how do we answer this question. And as I said, that will be a discussion which won't be recorded, but it will be a closed door meeting with everyone online and everyone in this room for us to hopefully have a really meaningful discussion. And after that, we're going to wrap up with some concrete ideas, concrete next steps. So to conclude, for my part, once again, thank you all for coming here today. We're going to be, as I said, recording and live streaming the presentations to begin with. And then when we go into the discussions, we're going to be adopting the Chatham House rule to ensure that we can all feel comfortable speaking openly. And with that, I'm going to hand back now to you, Max, to introduce the first of our presentations. Thank you.
No problem. And just to reiterate that we have got some amazing delegates here. We've got some amazing delegates online. If you'd like to introduce yourself on Zoom using the chat function so that other people can see who you are, because one thing that we do want to create from this is a collaboration to source a meaningful answer to this whole issue around Fairmiles and what's been set up. And likewise, if you're dialed in on social media, feel free to make any comments on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook, and we'll look to endeavour to answer those on your behalf. Simon, remind me, who have we got up first?
Well, first, we're going to find out a bit about the impact of air freighted fresh produce from developing countries. We're going to hear about some baseline research which was carried out by the University of Northampton. Dr. Ebenezer Laye is going to come and give us an introduction to that research.
Excellent. Ebenezer, if you'd like to come up and just swap over with Simon, that'd be fantastic. Ebenezer, just give a bit of a background to yourself, please. Your role within the university and your role within Fairmiles first.
Yeah, hello everyone. So my name is Ebenezer. As Simon said, I'm an associate professor of sustainable development law at the University of Northampton. I'm also chair of the University Centre for Sustainable Business Practices, which is a research centre within the Faculty of Business and Law at the university. My role within Fairmiles is to be part of the steering committee and obviously to support the project from a research perspective.
Thank you. Right, let's get into your presentation. Just bear with me, everyone, as we go through the joy that is the internet resume.
Yeah.
Here we go, sir. Well, just there's your button. You take control.
I will do that. Thank you, Max. Right. So, in terms of the baseline research, this is research that we've published from the University of Northampton from my research centre. It builds on other bits of work that we've done previously around social sustainability practices, but also on climate justice generally. So this research assesses the socioeconomic climate justice implications of banning air freighted fresh produce. Of course, Simon has mentioned that we're breathing new life into Fairmiles because after a number of years, air freight is under the spotlight, and we do need to reduce emissions, absolutely. But of course, is there a way to do that? And I think that's what we're trying to achieve with this particular project. So there are current trends which makes this research that we've done highly relevant. We undertook an investigative methodological approach using a case study, and the case study in this instance was Blue Skies. The case study allowed us to support and substantiate the arguments that we made in the study in respect of the socioeconomic benefits of air freight for communities that benefit directly and indirectly from Blue Skies as a fresh produce manufacturing from the business model that they operate. Now, this study provides a foundation, right? So it's a stepping stone upon which further research can be based. It helps us to understand and to define this issue around the climate justice implications of banning air freight. Within the study, we set out a number of recommendations on how policymakers can ensure that net zero strategies attain climate justice. We're not going to talk about recommendations as part of this roundtable discussion, but rather what we're going to talk about is to highlight what next steps we could take. And I think I'll do that sort of towards the end, just before the Q&A or just before the wrap up by Simon. So just to set context, a few facts about aviation emissions. Overall, aviation accounts for about 2%. That stretches to 3.5% if you take into account non-CO2 impacts. But if you strip out non-CO2 impacts, it's at 2%, accounting for 2% of all global emissions. And that is less than all of the emission sources that you see in the graphs on the right-hand side. So energy use in buildings, energy use in industry, transportation, and other bits of transportation, fuel combustion, agriculture, land use, industry, even waste. All of those sources are higher sources of emissions than aviation. And of course, that's not to say that emission sources from aviation are not important to address. They are. And the ambition to achieve net zero is a hugely important ambition. We all know what's going on in terms of climate change, and it is an urgent need for us, to address it. So because of that, aviation, of course, and the emissions that it produces causes a number of concerns for environmentalists, for commercial policymakers that are under pressure from civic society, from their customers, and even from policymakers within government to address emissions. And of course, that includes emissions that come from aviation. We all know that aviation is an extremely difficult sector to decarbonise. And because of that difficulty, it provides an attraction for environmentalists, for commercial policy makers to say, well, let's just ban it. Let's just ban air freight in that instance. Let's try and reduce as much as we possibly can our reliance on goods that are transported by air. And so there is that environmental and business case for it, which is what is fueling the trend that we're seeing at the moment. But of course, banning air freight has climate justice implications, which need to be taken into account. And I just want to spend this slide just talking about what climate justice is. So at its basic core, climate justice seeks to address inequalities and disproportionate impacts of climate change on different communities, different countries all across the world. However, this extends to the need to address inequalities and disproportionate impacts of climate change policies on the most vulnerable communities, the most vulnerable peoples in developing countries especially. So in effect, basically, if you put it into the context of Fairmiles and what we're trying to achieve, commercial net zero policies, commercial policies that are intended to reduce emissions, there has to be something done to ensure that those policies do not disproportionately impact the most vulnerable communities. So if you, for instance, ban air freight, there are going to be huge impacts within the supply chain, both within developing countries and developed countries, because of course, the supply chains these days are global. However, you will find that the impacts on the developing nation side of the supply chain will be a lot more severe than on the developed side of the supply chain. And this can be, in a sense, teased out from recent research that UNCTAD has done, where they have come out with findings to say that 64% of all countries in the developing world are commodity dependent, and they rely on air-freighted fresh produce as a source of foreign exchange. Now, that's hugely important. Now, what UNCTAD says is that within Africa, 45 of the 54 African countries are commodity dependent and their economies are commodity driven. What that means is that the majority of what they're exporting are non-value added agricultural products or agricultural items. And we all know within the global market, of course, value added goods are priced higher than non-value added goods. So if within any given economy, you're exporting more value added items, that means that you're getting more money into the country, you're having more foreign exchange to finance public services like health and education, infrastructure, etc. And the reverse is true, that if you are, as a nation, and as most developed nations are, exporting non-value added items, then that creates a huge problem. And what we've seen over the last few years is that African countries especially are striving to emerge out of this commodity-driven economic landscape by adding value to their agricultural produce. Of course, that can be seen in the likes of businesses like Blue Skies, which takes me to the next slide. So in our study, we use Blue Skies as a case study to highlight those climate justice implications. And Blue Skies' model of adding value at source is the kind of model that UNCTAD has highlighted as, in their own research, as being the kind of model that is going to help fuel the economies of the vast majority of African countries that are trying to make it out of the bowels of sort of a commodity-driven economic landscape. So what Blue Skies does is that they've got factories all over Africa, particularly in West Africa, specifically in Ghana, where they have their biggest factory. And they employ about 3,000 people in Ghana, 5,000 people, I think, worldwide, mostly in developing countries. Those people that they employ add value to their fresh cut, to the harvested fruits, and process them into fresh cut fruit, which is then flown over into UK and European markets. And it's worth highlighting that this model only works because Blue Skies is able to air freight. So within our research, we highlight, for instance, some of the advantages of the Blue Skies model, which is that in previous studies that we have done, we have identified the social value in 2021 alone of Blue Skies' economic and philanthropic activities in Ghana, the social value generated from that to be to the tune of $11.5 million in total. And of course, in our study, we look at the climate justice implications of this. And clearly, the first climate justice implication of abandoning air freight would be on the economy, which is that those thousands of people will not be able to be employed, and also all the philanthropic work which Blue Skies does would not go ahead any longer. So, of course, within our study, we highlight a number of recommendations of how commercial policymakers can ensure that their policies attain climate justice. So to wrap it up, before I hand over back to Max, and then we go to the next session, trying to account for the climate justice implications of abandoning air freight simply means us ensuring that our policies to reduce emissions, number one, yes, achieve that, but achieve that in a way which doesn't harm the most vulnerable communities and preserves the rights and dignities of people in developing countries, the rights to work, the rights to a good life, preserves that for them and ensures that the impacts on them are minimized. Over to you, Max.
Ebenezer, well done. One quick question that I'm sure we'll come on to in the Q&A. It was reported this morning that in 2024, there's going to be a predicted 84 million additional passenger flights. So we seem to have this oxymoron that there's a negativity towards air freight, but people moving in planes is set to increase, and surely it can be beneficial both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an important point to, to take into account, right? So when you look at within our own research, right, we highlight to some extent that when you look at Blue Sky's business model, their business model is to transport in the belly hold of passenger trains.
Yeah.
So even if in a worst case scenario, if all of Blue Sky's customers were to ban their products overnight, those planes that bring their products over here to the UK and to Europe will fly anyway because they're passenger planes. And I think it's it's important to highlight that as being significant, and we need to look at addressing this issue in a balanced way.
So what we need is the latest set of facts and figures. And on that basis, we need a couple of experts. So Ebenezer, thank you. Can we have James, if you come over? Roger, you okay?
Yeah. James is going to do one, and then I'll put them.
Got it. Okay. So James, I've got one slide. Do you want to run with that, or should we just talk? Slide.
We've got some slides.
We've got some slides. Let's do the slide.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm James McGregor. I was part of the original Fairmiles work 17 years ago, which a lot of those on this call were part of as well. If you remember, there was some evidence that we pulled together, some data, some new findings, which enabled us to all come together under the banner of Fairmiles to talk about how food miles was a concept that should not drive how decisions are made. And we are now back there again. You can see here in the bottom left-hand corner, this sort of executive summary that we've got here. What we've pulled together is some emerging evidence and data from today, 17 years later, under largely the same headings. But what we are very keen to see is that in support of private and public sector decisions and policies that are made around sustainability and net zero in the UK and Europe and wider, that air freight of fresh produce and flowers should be something that we should be looking to expand from the global south. For two reasons. One is that this is actually a lower carbon dioxide option. And secondly, from the point of view of the SDGs, so the Sustainable Development Goals, which everybody, all of our countries have signed up to for 2030, and we're still a long way from being able to achieve those. So the first really key point here, this is specifically around the livelihoods in Africa. Ebenezer was just talking here about this issue. We've got supply chains linking some of the poorest or relatively poorest farmers in the world with consumers here in the UK and Europe. And air freight enables that to happen, and it is a mechanism which is well proven to support not only large communities, but also many great spillovers, which we'll come to later. Our estimate at the moment is that this is considerably more than 5 million livelihoods in Africa, supported in part by the trade in fresh vegetables and flowers via air freight. A significant number, and significantly higher than the number that we had 17 years ago, which is positive, that decisions being made here by retailers are supporting a larger number of people. I'll now hand on to Roger for the rest of this slide.
Okay. But we have to see Roger. Roger, do you want to just introduce yourself to everyone online, please, before we go into your slide? Who are you? Who are you representing?
Roger Moore from the University of Exeter. I'm a professor of management systems, which is studying how digital technology is transforming supply chains in lots of different industries across the world.
Okay.
So that's how we come at the Fairmiles project. That's what we're interested in.
Okay. And so why? Are you of the view that we need to support Fairmiles?
Yeah. So we've got two big changes taking place, haven't we, in society? We've got the whole green agenda and we've got the digital transformation agenda. Mm-hmm. And if we're not careful, what we'll find is we get the green agenda overemphasising what's taking place. The digital technology can enable us to do things in a different way. Green is part of that story.
Yeah.
You know, I think we have to look at this thing in the round. We are keen to look at supply chains, what the implications of digital technology are for changing your supply chain.
Yeah, I think we're very lucky to have yourself and James here today. Okay, on with your presentation.
So, yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of quick points to add to what James has said, really. So when we started looking at this, doing some research in this space, it was quite a shock to me, and this might be my ignorance, but it was quite a shock to me that Africa is a net importer of food for the last 30 years. So immediately you get this view, okay, so you've got a part of the world here which is importing food. For example, Nigeria imports 10 times more than it exports. Now, that isn't food, that's machinery and equipment. Nigeria's an oil-rich state, so it obviously has those sort of things. But if you take a look at what's happening, say, for Ethiopian Airlines, it's the airline in Africa, so we understand, that has 5 times as much food being imported into Africa as it exports. Okay. Now that's a really big statistic to make you think about, okay, what's taking place here. So we're not just talking about passenger traffic here, we're talking about how food is being moved.
Yeah.
And immediately that leaves you with the thought that actually who benefits from that? Well, UK and Europe. We export a lot of food. So
I keep trying to interject that the 10 fastest growing cities in the world are all in Africa.
Yeah.
Look at like South Africa, fresh produce alone. They export 4.5 million tons of fresh produce to better markets that they get better return from, and the domestic market they supply 3.5 million tons into.
Yeah, I think that's not untypical of what we see. So we're getting a world where exports, UK and Europe's economy actually does depend on, to some extent, what's taking place in Africa is it exports lots of food. And you mentioned this figure around passenger traffic. We are going to see, the estimate is that it's going to double. Africa's passenger traffic will double by 2035. That means a lot more flights into Africa. There's a lot more opportunity for UK and European growers to export food. But there is also then a real opportunity to import food as well and to maintain the livelihoods that Ebenezer was talking about. And why I'm interested in this is because, we live in a world where digital transformation and just-in-time supply chains are much more commonplace. We're living in a world where we can send a signal. We were talking to someone this week, a farmer in Kenya, who said to us, I may get a signal on a Thursday morning, and I'm going to be delivering the food on Friday afternoon, and it will be in your shelves on Saturday morning. Now, that sort of world reduces the amount of waste. We're looking for, waste is a big issue. We talk about productivity and green and waste. We're trying to reduce waste. Freight, traffic in aircraft, moving it through air freight does enable us to reduce that. You're dealing with a perishability issue. Yeah. So digital transformation can enable it. We've got lots more opportunities. One final point from me is that by enabling air freight, by enabling countries in Africa to produce food, which is then shipped to developed economies, as you were talking about, there is this spillover effect. There's the spillover effect of, yes, there's technology transfer. We're getting knowledge being exported so that people know, things about yield, what crops to grow, they know more about soils, what fertilizers. There's a real spillover effect in the internal economy as well. So that's a wholly positive thing. Then there's the service sector growth, isn't there? There's all these things about foreign exchange. Then there's all the stuff about, if you're an investor, you actually want to invest in Africa, but you're cautious about it. Now you're getting an economy which is a bit more developed, understands more about how it works. That's wholly positive. And the final one for me is, we read a lot about migration, don't we? It's a massive hot topic across Europe, across the UK. How do we deal with migration? Well, one of the ways in which we can help with migration is by enabling people in their location to live better quality lives. And digital transformation is part of that story.
Yeah, well done. I've got to mention the Blue Sky Farm School competition because you look at that example within Ghana.
Right.
They found that there was a number of the children, even the adults, didn't want to work in agriculture, so they were all running off into the cities, hoping to be doctors and accountants, but becoming taxi drivers and even worse. And so the Blue Skies Farm competition within a 50-kilometre radius of the it's gone national. Madam Ruth has shown off, rightly so. Those schools get seed fertiliser and tools to grow fresh produce. When I visited, even the teachers were getting excited and were growing their own produce and feeding the village and paying for stationery. So it's just
Yeah. And through trade, that enables knowledge to be transferred.
well done, Roger. Well, this tech is going so well, we can't, it's going
Okay, I'm good.
Okay, here we go.
We would all hope. What we're going to show you now is a screenshot of from one of these radar programs that you can all see, and picture tells many words. Nobody needs to listen to me. We can just look at this picture.
Wow.
I'm not even going to describe it, but talking over this and to bring together some of the points that have just been made here. Why do planes fly to destinations in Africa and other parts of the developing world or the emerging world? And it's, if we use the example particularly of Kenya, we're looking at safaris and salmon as the things which are on planes, which cause these planes to fly from the UK. And not the sweet corn, which is included as a byproduct flying back in the belly hold of those planes flying out of Africa. And I think it's really important to start thinking about these sorts of issues. That if we in the UK are to see reducing aviation as part of our net zero strategy, then looking at reducing imports of a byproduct effectively from this trade is not going to change the number of planes flying, as has already been mentioned. However, we could look at flying out fewer elements that the UK, for instance, the second point, does already export. These are numbers from 2018, but still very relevant from a percentage point of view today. Salmon, gold, and other minerals, and lots of other value-added elements that we export. The COP28 has just finished, and as part of that was a huge push towards the just transition. We're seeing this as being something that we want to emphasise from the point of view of this work as well. Climate equality is on the agenda now. And when we start putting the evidence together, a just transition does not mean reducing trade with Africa. It actually means exactly the opposite. You can see there the points there, third and fourth. But also what we're dealing with here when we deal with food that's imported by air freight anywhere in the world, it's typically the highest quality, it accords with the highest standards, not just the EU food law and the various other phytosanitary needs that we have coming into Europe and the UK, but also some of the global standards, global gap, fair trade, etc. You can see them there on the screen. So yeah, we'll leave it there. And
it doesn't come down to the perception of the consumer. We've seen that recently in the UK with the demise of some plant-based products, that the consumer just wants cheap food, and air freight actually is cheap food because of the volume. As Roger sort of intimated, the supply chain is so robust that it seems to be this perception actually that we should be promoting it, and it's not a potential carrier of doom. Especially with everything that we've got going on within the UK and Western Europe with diabetes. We need more fresh produce coming in. We need more people like Madam to supply us, and air freight which would be a very good compromise to be able to achieve that, and the benefits that they can provide to the countries in Africa, like the ones that we've been nominating. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think we need to be moving to a situation where consumers are proud to buy produce, fresh produce, particularly that has come from African countries, Asian countries, etc., and should not be seen in any other way. Supermarkets should be seen as part of a net zero strategy and should be in a position where they're proud of this, advertising this, and informing their consumers and their shareholders that this is part of their net zero strategy. It's maybe not the most obvious approach, but it is something that we know that consumers and retailers will understand.
Yeah, and I think we're very privileged in this room, as everyone else listening in. We know the success stories. Again, I'm picking on Madam Ruth as a direct example of the likes of West Africa. We need to get that story out. And I think that's what we're all hoping to achieve with Fairmiles. Thank you very much, James. Thank you very much, Roger. Shall we have our next speaker up? Sit down. You're going to introduce yourself to a few thousand people online.
Well, afternoon, everybody. I'm Maureen Ware. I work for an organisation called COLEAD, it's actually an association and it represents stakeholders in the fruit and vegetable sector in Africa, Caribbean, Pacific countries and the EU. And so, as well as being an association with our membership, we also implement development programmes. And for the last 20 years, we've been running technical assistance programmes, mainly funded by the European Union. And the real focus of that has been on facilitating market access.
Okay.
And so we've been jumping through lots of hoops in order to enable exporters from Africa mainly to access European markets.
And where do you think we are at the moment? Are we in a trough of despair, or can you see that with a bit of robust lobbying, such as Fairmiles and us all collaborating, that we can see through this and create success?
Well, I hope so. I mean, like James, some of the others, I've been here before.
Yep.
15 years ago, we were having the same discussion, and we did manage to overturn lots of minds.
Yeah.
So we really hope that we can do that again by just really presenting this in a way that is looking at it in more fairly, and not just more fairly, but actually more logically and more defensively, I think.
Well done. Just before we start your presentation, just to say, everyone, we've got an issue with the chat function. I think it's amazing we've got everything working, we've got sound. But if you want to communicate with us, use the question function on Zoom if you're on Zoom. If you're on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, just use the chat functions, the messaging functions on those, and we'll pick it up. But on Zoom, if you want to communicate with us, use the question, the Q&A element. Actually, start your presentation. Just bear with me.
What we've heard so far has been a very eloquent academic perspective. The next 15 minutes are a bit more really, reflections from the ground about what is happening to those of us who are either producing and exporting or trying to support those who are producing and exporting.
All right, shall I just give you the controls? Just that button there.
That one.
Yeah.
All right, so where are we now? I think it's important to put this into perspective. Africa's been supplying the EU and the UK for over many years, well over 20 years, with tropical and off-season produce. And this is a sector that's not being driven from the export side, but this is very much being pulled by European markets who have required this produce. Most of it has gone into retail. I think about 80% of fresh produce are sold in the EU and UK markets. About 80% or so of that is going through retail. Retail, as all of us who are involved in the industry know, is incredibly demanding. It's demanding in terms of quality, in terms of price, in terms of being able to demonstrate good practice in terms of social, environmental, and also food safety requirements. And so being able to maintain that market access over the past 20 years has taken a huge effort and a massive amount of resources on the part of those export sectors. And it's also important to remember that fresh produce is not like other things. It's just in time. Somebody already mentioned a very short space of time between harvest and getting something onto the shelf in Europe or the UK, and that brings a lot of challenges in itself with late orders, having to be very adaptive and really flexible. But this investment over the last 20 years has been continual. There's been so many different challenges, different demands, as markets have evolved, as requirements have evolved, and that's been a really big investment at the expense of other things that people have invested in, but really pulled by this demand from European buyers. And it's really important to highlight that meeting those requirements is disproportionately challenging for low-income countries, whichever way you look at it, because of limited resources, perhaps lack of public sector infrastructure, etc. And so jumping through those hoops is a lot harder for countries in sub-Saharan Africa than it is for European companies. So we're looking at an industry that has evolved, but one that has been challenging, and has really produced a lot of benefit in terms of creating jobs, in terms of creating wealth, etc. in those exporting countries. And here, something that was highlighted earlier by Ebenezer zero air freight here means automatically a lot of those short shelf life products like beans, like baby corn, etc. It'll just mean put them out altogether because there's not an alternative at the moment to supply those by any other route because the short shelf life means that they can't be in by ship. So the difficulty that we're facing at the moment is that after spending 20 years trying to help people access European markets, we're now facing some of our partners saying, my buyers are no longer buying off me because I'm air freighting, and what do I do? I mean, what's the next hoop that I can jump through? Well, there isn't one, but why? How do you justify that? And I think that's what I'm going to try and do here. It's rather shamelessly emotive, I have to say, in the way that I'm trying to present it, but I'm not going to apologise for that. This is just visually representing some of the things that James and Ebenezer have already mentioned. Food is not the main emitter of greenhouse gases, and within the whole food sector, transport is actually not a massive part of that. Here is into our modern data, the research that they've compiled, and data they've compiled, transport is only 6%. It's not very big. And then you look at other emitters in terms of even aviation. I didn't know that James was going to show that very nice map showing the sort of international flights, but if you look at just domestic flights, you can see here, in most of Africa, you don't even have data because there's hardly any domestic flights at all. So the culprits are not sub-Saharan Africa in terms of emitting, they're just shuffling people around internally. Cumulative CO2 emissions, this is since 1750. Again, Africa, you're looking at 0.2, less than 0.2% of global emissions. If we look at emissions today, that map looks almost exactly the same, except for the USA and China are swap places. But again, emissions happening today from sub-Saharan Africa are tiny compared to what they are in Europe and other parts of the world. But in terms of the number of people living in poverty, and where you really have this need to develop local economies, to develop from commodity-based exports, etc., sub-Saharan Africa is still struggling, and here you can see 450 million people, more or less, still living in extreme poverty. So against that background, that question of why, it's really challenging, really difficult to answer. As I said, this is a bit sort of emotive, but I think it's important to emphasize that the messages here are really simple. There's not, it's not a complex argument that we're trying to get across here. Vulnerable populations in developing countries, in particular farmers, small farmers, are those that really today are the most severely affected by climate change and are suffering from extreme weather, drought in the whole of Africa, flooding, etc. And African farmers, despite being the least responsible for climate change, are at the moment suffering the brunt of its consequences. And so adding an extra burden on that by limiting access for those farmers to lucrative market, it's not even just unfair, it's really indefensible. And I think that the next two speakers that are going to come after me are going to present much more effectively and eloquently what these changes are actually meaning for their export sectors and for local economies and for the people who are involved in this trade. So with that, I'll finish and hand over. I hope that, sorry, I was going to say, I hope that we've got Clement Tulasi in the call.
Okay, and was he due on now, Simon?
Yes.
Yes, he's joining us from the representing the horticultural sector in Kenya, the Horticulture Task Force.
Right, Clement is here. I'm going to promote Clement to a panelist. And Clement, you will be rejoining the webinar as a panelist. Just as we're waiting for Clement, I just had a really interesting WhatsApp question that we'll promote to everyone else a little bit later. What's the answer? Is it government? Is it industry education? Is it getting more multinationals involved within this sector?
I think the industry just needs to reflect on the way it approaches net zero. This is what this community around Fairmiles is all about. It's trying to have a sensible conversation about how we know we need to decarbonise. We know what we need to do. We just need to do it in a way that is effective, because this is not even going to have very much impact.
No.
But we need to do it in a way that's fair.
Yeah.
And so this is what engagement and conversation needs to be about.
Yeah. Are you positive? Are you optimistic about the future?
I'm trying to be, yeah. It worked last time round because I think, the arguments are very persuasive.
Yeah.
And I think the industry will come on board with it.
Yes.
That's my feeling, I hope.
Well done. Well done. Clement, do you want to just turn on your video? Oh, this is getting right. Clement, can you talk to us?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, Clement.
Okay, my name is Clement Tulezi. I'm the CEO of Kenya Flower Council, but I also represent the horticulture sector in Kenya as the chair of the National Horticulture Task Force. I represent the voice of the producers, exporters from Kenya, and what I'll be sharing are experiences from Kenya from a very practical perspective on the implication of if we were to stop air freight for fresh produce from Kenya, what it means. We positively appreciate all the efforts on climate change and all the mitigating measures that are there on the same, but we depend on air freight to move our produce to the market. And for Kenya, this is important because the Kenya horticulture sector represents a greater part of our economy. It contributes to almost 7% of our GDP, generating for us about 750 million pounds every year, creating employment for 350,000 people annually. And for those who depend on our sector, it's more than 4 million people. We grow a number of products, cut flowers, vegetables, fruits, spices, and herbs. And out of all that we export, we can see that the effect it has on our economy is huge, as I've mentioned. Every day, we grow under the sun. And this is an important point because we don't grow this under any external injection of any external factors as far as the energy is concerned. So 12 hours a day, 365 days, we have the sun overhead where we grow this product. The product is of high quality, highly appreciated by consumers, both in the EU and the UK. It is, we also look at it much more at the point of risk. So food safety, social compliance, fair trade are some of the things that we look at. For us from Kenya Flower Council, we can say that out of all the growers in Kenya, under Kenya Flower Council, 64 of them from 140 farms have actually solar power, which they use during the day, almost 100%. So that is, for us, that is very positive in terms of looking after our environment. The reality about air freight ban is that it's going to affect a lot of livelihoods, as I've mentioned. Over 4 million people will be affected out of this. For example, I know of a farm, when they stopped, vegetable farm, when they stopped shipping to one of the importers, they are losing about 3.8 million pounds every year, and over 200 jobs have been lost as at June this year. And some of these people who have lost their jobs, they are asking, why should we be on the losing? They don't understand all this. So this is a huge impact. You can extrapolate that against all the other farms that are producing. There will be immense negative impact if this was to happen. The export the export supply chains are critical in our investment, and we believe that income becomes very important for these producers to continue investing in climate change adaptation, mitigation technology, and livelihoods. As I mentioned, horticulture is very important, is among the top 3 foreign exchange earners for this country. And I will pose a question here. For the UK, we know that the UK is exporting a number of goods, road vehicles, power generating machinery, and pharmaceuticals are the top three. Will the UK, for example, be able to stop this? And this is what it means for us as a country if we were to stop trade or in horticulture. Beyond all these strict compliance and certification that I mentioned, there is the social part of our business. We support a lot of social welfare programs, including school programs, roads, protecting water sources, health facilities, among many other things. If we were to stop this, you can imagine the ability of many people being able to take their children to school will be completely diminished. And for us as a developing country, education is very, very important. We want to have almost, if I can say, 100% transition between one grade to another. So this is going to have a huge impact if there is any stop in freight of our produce through air. So we are very clear on why we would support that air freight should continue, even as we look at supporting all the measures that are there around bringing in the mitigating challenges. And we are prepared to put in much more when the resources are coming to our end. Thank you.
Can I just say thank you? I think that it's just like when we had Alistair from Blue Skies on a previous broadcast. It's great having us all in London and the Embankment here, but we actually need to hear it from Africa. And we've just heard it from yourself and your question or the scenario you point out of what would happen if the UK were to stop exporting the likes of generators to Africa. It is such a great scenario. We spend so much time and effort in the UK talking about exporting. We must export. Well, how's it going to feel if Africa can't export to us? It's going to be not only disruptive, it could create significant issues within Africa. And we all are talking within the UK at the moment, without trying to cross a political line, about immigration. And one of the reasons for that is people are looking for a better life because they think they can get it in the UK. Well, so if we keep buying from the likes of Africa fresh produce, we're going to be able to look after yourself, your colleagues, your friends, your businesses to keep producing fantastic fresh produce. So Clement, we must support you. So just one question, same question I asked Mauro. What's the answer? From your perspective from Kenya, if we could give you the magic wand to create a success for Fairmiles, what would you want to see? What's the answer, Clement?
We want to see much more support from the buyers and from the export market on all the efforts that we are putting in. We know that on the ground, this is important, the climate change and all other things that we have to do to support climate change efforts. We are putting in, so we will want to have a bit more support. The first one, as I mentioned, is about continuing to buy our product. Secondly, probably put in a bit much more effort from the buyer side towards all those efforts. So if those two could be done, we see a process where we can all work together and continue promoting trade, even as we look at stemming some of the things you are talking about. For us in Kenya, we look at the rural-urban migration. We are one of the few industries in Kenya that stems the rural-urban migration because we provide jobs where the people are in the rural areas.
Well done. And we talked about collaboration a lot today. Would you be open to collaboration if there were retailers in the UK or Europe or further afield that wanted to find out more about Kenya and creating longer term partnerships, create success around this? I presume you'd be happy to collaborate. If they were to come over, you'd be happy to host them and show them and everything that we want to learn from yourself and your colleagues. You'd be happy to collaborate.
Exactly, that is the word. We will be very happy to collaborate. Where we can sit and look at ideas, what will work for us to continue the business, both from the buyer side and the producer side.
Okay, so are you positive about the future?
I'm remaining positive. I always sit on the positive side because I believe that the decisions that will be made or can be made around this will be very sound. All these factors will be looked at, and anyone who can make a decision on that will be very sober to understand what this actually means. So I remain very positive about it.
Excellent. Clement, just to wrap up, what is the most beautiful country in the world?
Say that again?
What is the most beautiful country in the world?
Kenya.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Clement, well done. You're brilliant. We're going to engage a lot more with you in the future, in 2024 and beyond. Could you do me a huge favour and just turn off your video, but still listen in? You're brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent. Who do we have? Ebenezer next. Is this? Oh, it's Ruth. My favourite person. Favourite person. Right, Ruth. Just introduce yourself, Madam Ruth. Introduce yourself to everyone in the UK and internationally, please.
First of all, stop using the word madam.
In Ghana, it's a sign of respect.
It's a sign of respect. So I'm with Smita J. I'm with these guys. I'm the West African General Manager. I've been with the business for the past 24 years. I've had the privilege to grow with the business. So I've seen all the changes and the stuff.
Yeah. So how did it start when you commenced with the business, and where is the business today?
Yeah, so when I started, these guys literally were just employing between 35 to 50 people. Currently, we employ over 3,000 people in Ghana alone. And in Ghana, where you have extended families, when we say 3,000 people, we are looking at thousands of people. Yeah. Because every household is not less than 6-7 people. So the impact of employing one person is huge. Okay, so it's a community of development where the employment we create in the community we are has grown so much, not just for the staff, but also for the farmers, for people looking at going to schools. I heard Clement talking about schools here. The schools in our locality, now when you ask, what do you want to do? Oh, when I finish, I want to work with Blue Skies. This is the impact we've made in the area where we are. And it tells you how important these things are, not just because you want people to go to bed, it stops people from thinking of migrating. Yeah. Okay. I heard Moral talking about the impact of the emission. You see, 0.2%. It's just negligible when you look at the focus they're making. But when you look at the impact it makes when you stop flying, it's almost 90% of livelihoods, 90% of people, who live in those communities and the impact to make on them.
Essentially, just on that side, but for people who aren't fully aware of Blue Skies, what do Blue Skies do in Accra, in Ghana? What are you growing? What are you processing? Where can you find this? Is it ball bearings? What is it?
So Blue Skies deals in perishable fruits. It started in 1997, and we mainly do tropical fruits in Ghana. Currently, we do all types of fresh fruits around the world. We are in different countries, but Ghana is the mother company. We are located in the eastern side of Ghana, and we fly all our products to UK, Europe in general. So we use all the airlines that you can think of too.
Yeah. Is there any possibility that that product could go by another route? Could it be frozen? Could it be guaranteed?
Unfortunately, a highly perishable, limited shelf life within 6 to 7 days shelf life.
Yeah. Okay. So the UK, it is prepared slice and dice fruit, as I would say, from major retailers.
We add value at source. All you do is pick it on shelf and send it straight.
Okay, so the team are harvesting now, say, in Ghana. When will they land in the UK? 3 weeks, 4 weeks down the line?
No, 24 hours.
24 hours from Ghana?
From Ghana.
Okay.
So it's ordered today and you get it tomorrow on shelf. Yep. That's how the speed we use to produce.
And the technical accreditations that you have. The high, you don't have a high facility, do you?
Of course we do. So, honestly, having a factory in Africa, raise a lot of questions. People tend to say in Africa, they do it right. We have all the high standards you can think of. British Retail Council, BRC, they call it. We have the SMITA audits. We have the food safety audits. We have all the high standard audits. We have international auditors who come to audit us annually to ensure that we meet all the specifications and standards of the food factory. Yeah. Okay. So to ask this question, I asked Maura and what does success look like for you, for Fairmiles, for the success of Fairmiles? What do you want to see? Yeah, we want them to be successful. You want the support of the international community where they appreciate that supporting businesses that are, because you encourage international, you encourage foreigners to set up in Africa. So you have to encourage them to be able to go set up. The the business that they've set up, we are trying to discourage them from flying or from trying to grow. They can only be successful if they are supported. The little impact they are making there has huge impact in the African community. We have two of our customers who joins, one in the UK and one in Europe. And we've built almost, in the past 15 years, almost 150 schools, water, So basic things in community that makes an impact in the lives of, the low standard communities that we have around us.
Yeah. So this is a shout out. I know we've got a lot of retailers online will be listening on the record. It's not all about the bottom right hand corner of the Excel spreadsheet for that buyer. Yes, that retailer has to make a margin for them to be profitable in the very hard attritional retail sector, but also to have long-term relationships with businesses in Africa.
Correct.
You employ 4,000 people. I believe there's an ecosystem of 45,000 people that hang off yourself in Ghana, let alone your new business, your relatively new business in Benin, in Brazil, in Egypt, in South Africa, and in Corby. And this is just one little fruit business. So if we can support all of those businesses in Africa on a similar basis, the changing the dial, pushing that lever would be significant.
Definitely.
So the same question I asked Clement, would you be happy to collaborate? If there are people, whether it be buyers, retailers, or people that want to find out more, they don't quite understand. They thought it just came off a shelf on a retail, in a retail. If they wanted to reach out to you and your colleagues, you'd be happy to do that.
We're more than happy to do that, to make sure that people understand this.
Yeah, okay. The most beautiful country in the world.
Ghana first, Kenya second.
I thought you were going to say Cuba as well. And Ruth, thank you. You're fantastic. Thank you. Excellent. Well done. Ebenezer, thank you. You've got to go to see Ruth and her team. I'm yet to go to the Benin site, which I can't wait to do. But no, when I go back to, I don't know how you feel about going back to Ghana. It's like my second home.
Yeah, it is.
Well, it's your first home.
Yeah.
Excellent. Shall we get on to it with your slide?
Yeah. So I'm just here to, we're beginning to wrap up on sort of the this part of the program before we go into the Q&A. So I'm here to talk about where next, and then I'll sort of hand back over to you, and you hand back over to Simon. So in our own research, we talk about possible recommendations. We're not calling them recommendations for the purpose of this discussion. We're going to the Q&A session, and we just want to set context. We just want to highlight possible areas for action in terms of next steps, and the things that I'm about to highlight now will provide the context for the conversation, in the Q&A.
Right, you keep talking, I'll fix it.
Right. So the two main things that I have to highlight in terms of next steps. So how do we address this problem? How do we address this issue? The two main things that we are looking to bring to the table in terms of a discussion, some thoughts and ideas. The issue, of course, is how do we balance the approach to attaining net zero when it comes to air freight. And we think one of the things that we could do is to undertake the development of a co-created toolkit for net zero policy making. What this toolkit will do is that it will help commercial policymakers to navigate the intricate interplay between environmental and socioeconomic dimensions which play out in this issue. And of course, those dimensions are in tension with each other. And so with this interplay, you've got to find a balance between the rights, the risks, and the responsibilities. And that makes an effective framework for crafting and shaping equitable climate change policies that attain climate justice. And this will ensure the upholding of rights and responsibilities whilst addressing and mitigating risks, especially for marginalized and vulnerable communities in supply chains. And then secondly, we need to undertake further research. We need to understand. We've talked about some research that we ourselves have done, and Roger and James have also talked about other bits of research. Morag has presented some elements of research as well. But we need to do further research to better understand the economic and the social and trade implications of a ban or limit on air freighted fresh produce, especially for community-driven economies. And a lot of this research can take the form of some kind of a modeling or predictive analysis, where we enhance, we apply digital tools to try and better understand what really happens at a granular level, a more granular level, with a ban on air freight, air freighted fresh produce. And just to wrap up before I hand over back to you, Max, you asked the question, what are the answers? And I think in line with this slide, what I would say is that the answer is to come up with a solution which demonstrates that we are recognizing the humanity in each other. The whole point of us trying to reach net zero is to save the planet. What is the point of saving the planet if we can't save the people? What is the point of saving the planet and addressing climate change if it means that the poorer or the poorest amongst us become even poorer, and the desperate amongst us become more desperate, and the destitute become more destitute, and the marginalized become more marginalized? What is the point of all of that? So I think, it has to play at the back of our minds. We've presented a lot of, as Morag was saying, a lot of academic stuff and also some practical stuff. But at the end of it, when you strip all of the way, it comes down to that. How many of us would be happy to be in the shoes of people in Kenya or Ghana or South Africa that rely on jobs that are linked to air freighted fresh produce? How many of us would be happy to have those jobs taken away? How many of us would be happy to lose that livelihood, not have any economic safety net or employment safety net, as we do in countries like this? But that's not a possibility in Africa. And how many of us would be happy with that life? If the answer is that none of us would be happy with that life, then why are we happy to have that life for others? And I think that's the important thing here.
Very true. Well done. Simon, I'm going to come after you say there, Simon, I'm going to ask you to come here, just wrap up for us for those on social media before we swap over to the Q&A session. So could you just tell everyone, especially those that might have dialed in a bit late, Fairmiles, how do we connect with us? How do we find out more? How do we engage? How do we get involved? Just take it away, please.
So if you go to our website, www.fairmiles.org, you can find out more about us there. We'll be publishing the latest news, any events that we've got coming up. We've got some information on there as well. So that's where you can get in touch, and through that as well, you can get some contact details where you can get in touch with us too. Obviously, we want to collaborate with as many people as possible on this. It's about engagement. It's about having this conversation. And hopefully between us together we can take forward some of these ideas, recommendations, actions, particularly some of the ideas that are going to be discussed in the discussion that's coming up next, because we really want to actually turn this conversation that we've had today into some real concrete actions.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I checked on the figures earlier, and we had over 1,800 people dialed in from all over the world on social media listening in. So this is but the start of the journey. We need everyone to come in to collaborate and look at the esteemed company that we've got here today, from industry to academia, and to lots of you and I, Ebenezer. So the more that we can collectively hold hands to create this positive change, the better, because we want to see businesses like Blue Skies and all the other businesses in Africa flourish. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who's listening online on social media. We're going to stop that feed shortly, and then we're going to go to the Q&A session on Zoom, and that's going to be a private conversation. So we thank everyone on social media, and we hope you have a great Christmas and a happy New Year, and we look forward to seeing you all very shortly on the next Fairmiles broadcast. Thank you very much. How should we start? Right, what I think I might have done is, oh no, that's worked. I'll just make sure that, and guys, did you want to just come in a bit for this Q&A side? We'll make it sort of more of a wine bar / pub chat.
Should we sit in this one?